and welcome. I'm Frederick. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here at Berkeley Extension. I'm here co-moderating with my colleague, Jean-Michel.
Hello, I'm Jean-Michel Reykjavik. I'm a Chair Marketing Professor at CNAM, and I will be moderating with Frederick. Welcome to everyone. We are very pleased to have people from all over the world connecting with this session. CNAM and Berkeley signed an agreement already 2 years ago, I think, to promote and develop MBA study tracks. Thanks to COVID, everything was definitely jeopardized. So we decided to keep on discussing and keep on promoting the effort we do to have a fascinating, very interesting MBA hybrid, but also in the near future, fully online. And we launch those sessions, those panels linked to COVID, trying to make the link between different point of views, the US point of view, the European point of view. And for each panel, we do have one academic and one professional from each side of the, I would say, of the ocean. The first events were linked to strategy, to innovation, to chaos management, to innovation, and lately the last one was about online education. Today we are just about to end the lockdown, at least in Europe, and we decided to have a panel dedicated to back to the office. All of us are more or less going back to the office, and the title of today is Back to the Office or Virtual Company. Frederick?
We are very, very excited to welcome an incredible panel with us, and transatlantic panel. We have colleagues from France and we have colleagues here from the San Francisco Bay Area. And we are very excited actually to discuss this topic with this international expertise, because there's a lot being said already about the future of work and back to the office. But it's rare to actually have the opportunity to see such different perspectives from such deep experts in the domain. Really, there are potential issues that we're all grappling with that we need answers to, and we very much look forward to the discussion here to really point into directions that will be empowering to you all in your thinking, in your strategy to go back to the office. Notably, the compromises that business are taking now potentially between performance, creativity, efficiency, and innovation, employees wishing to return to office or employees wanting to stay at home, anything in between. The level of technological adoption is very different from one company to the other, from one person within a company to the other, from one region to another. It is a time now after this global pandemic where the back to office or not is generating a lot of discrepancies, a lot of rifts within and out and between companies and organizations. This international perspective will really help us put the spotlight on some of them. And one particular issue, just to open up your minds and open up the thinking and get this panel going, is just the sheer recognition that with this heightened attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that we are facing around the globe, if you think about going back to the office with some of your staff, but not all of them, you're almost mechanically creating inequity. You're almost mechanically creating a situation where you have what you can call remote discrimination or Zoom discrimination, if you want, depending on the software you're using, where you are at a risk to create cliques and groups in the office. There is ideas of having to be in the office when the boss is there or not, otherwise you will miss out. And at the same time, these tools have actually the opportunity to become much more drivers of inclusiveness and diversity if they're used well. So with that, I would hand over to you, again, Jean-Michel, to present the agenda. And
the agenda of today will be the following one. Thank you, Frederic. The agenda will be the following one. We will start with a brief presentation of our panelists. Then we will leave them a bit of time in order to give their own perspective about the topic of today. And then we will go into open discussion, and we'll leave the floor to the audience to raise different questions. So, Jill, very briefly, if you can present yourself, please.
Thank you. And thank you for your remarks, Frederic, because that's a topic of great interest to me, is equity. My name is Jill Finlayson, and I'm the director of the Expanding Diversity and Gender Equity in Tech Initiative at the University of California, or EDGE in Tech for short, because we believe diverse teams are critical to being successful in tech. I'm particularly interested in this topic today because while this has been very disruptive and the impacts have been disproportionate for women, it has also opened up the door for different changes to how we address these problems and making those policies and practices more inclusive.
Thank you, Jill. Anne, please.
Hello, so good morning. I'm Anne Bertigny-Poncet. I'm associate professor at the CNAM in innovation management, and my research studies are more into collaborative innovation. So I'm really excited to be in this panel, and thank you for this opportunity. I will maybe more, we'll see that later on, but my contribution or my point of view will be more on the innovation side, and more precisely on the collaborative innovation. And I will try to give my point of view why we need also to come back to the office, or at least to maybe collaborative spaces to enable maybe a more efficient innovation. But we'll see also how we can use what we call temporary proximity for this.
Thank you. John?
Okay. Good morning. In San Francisco. My name is John. I'm a computer guy, and I would be, I guess, called someone in industry. I have been working in physically distributed teams now for 28 years, been leading them as a manager, hiring and firing and dealing with personnel and conflict and stuff like that for 14 years, and running workshops at incubators and universities and coaching companies for 7 years. Includes a book, business management book, second edition came out this year, around how do you lead and manage physically distributed teams. And the last part of what I've done is worked with different jurisdictions around how having humans work from home actually helps shape and change the workforce diversity angle, but also helps shape economic development. So instead of bringing large amounts of money with a company to a particular location, you can bring humans and bring jobs and change the economic development game significantly. That's all of those angles play together.
Thank you, John. I leave the mic to Patrick now.
Hello, everyone. So good morning. So I am Patrick Buffard. I am the Executive Vice President of the French Lottery, which is the third largest lottery in the world. I'm in charge of retail sales, media buying, TV production, and sports betting, our sports betting activity. I manage 900 people in different locations in France, in French Polynesia, in French West Indies, and in the Indian Ocean. So I'm already used, or I already practice remote management. Of course, I think the experiment I can share with you today is what happened at our company. When the pandemic started, we had just signed remote work agreements with our unions, and we are already implementing remote work within the company, but it didn't concern everyone. It was only, I would say, a significant part of the employees who already accepted to start this initiative. But the interesting thing is, with the pandemic, everything changed. We totally moved from 1 to 2 days of remote work to everyone doing remote work in 15 days. We totally switched the company from one business model to the other. So that's, I think there's a lot of things I could share about our experience.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. So this topic is a very interesting, very motivating topic. There were already trends before, trends in terms of organization, global organization, usage of technology, and so on. But of course, for all of us, COVID was kind of an accelerator. And now we want to look ahead. We want to see the evolution of the work environment from the different perspectives: organization, employees, location, use of technology, and so on. And what we are trying to achieve out of this session is what kind of advice do you give to our audience, our managers who are trying to go back to work and trying to find new ways of organizing their companies. So we will leave you about 10 minutes, 7 minutes, depending on your wish, on what's your point of view on this very topic, and then we will go on to debate. So once again, I will start with Jill. Jill, what's your perspective on this topic, and what are the comments and also the advice you want to give to our audience today about this topic? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to say there are 3 key things that I want people to walk away with after I chat with you. And that is, 1, you need to review how you're doing your leadership training. This is a skills-based question. The second is you need to rethink and revise your practices, policies, and benefits, the perks. And the third is you need to think about redesigning the physical and emotional space of the actual workplace. So just to level set everyone, as you know, the COVID crisis had very disproportionate impacts on women and people of color. And just to level set everyone, there are 1.5 million fewer women working mothers in the workforce today than this time last year. And for every woman who has entered the workforce in April, roughly 2.2 men have returned to work. This is a dramatic difference, and it has undone decades of progress in inclusion. But one thing you may not be aware of is that during this COVID crisis, when people are home, they're home with children, we found that men have been promoted 3 times more often than women during the pandemic. And this is 34% of the men working remotely with children at home received a promotion compared to 9% of women in the same situation. And not only that, 26% of men received a pay raise while working remotely as compared to 13% of women. So this isn't just a case of are people leaving the workforce, are they coming back to the workforce, even if they're keeping their job, because of the disparate impacts and significant stretch that is put on the women who are often working and having these additional responsibilities, it's having an impact in other ways and shapes. So with that said, that's why we need to have a different type of leadership. We need to be thinking about these issues. It needs to be a human-centric work environment rather than an office-centric environment. This means trust. This means empathy-based management. It means providing that flexibility and really listening and understanding and supporting your employees so that you can understand the context that they're operating in. Secondly, is to really rethink and revise practices, policies, and benefits. We know actually that flexible time is very beneficial to people with outside work responsibilities. And so we really want to leverage this. This is an opportunity not to go back to work or back to the old normal. This is how do we go to a new and better normal, right? We don't want the old thing. We want to improve upon. And this crisis is giving us that opportunity to really go back and look at the policies and practices and benefits and say, are these the ones that matter? Are these the ones that we want to offer? Because, certainly free food is great. We're not going to have the communal food anymore. We're going to have individually boxed lunches, right? So it's going to change how those perks play out. But we're going to need support for people who are doing remote work. Do they have the equipment and tools to do long-term work remotely? Or better yet, do they have access to a co-working facility if they don't have a place where they can be away from distractions and have the high-speed internet that they need? are those benefits being equitably offered? Because some people will have to come back to work, some people may not have to. What kind of parity is that going to promote? So this is a big experiment. We need to measure, we need to listen, and we need to support staff and evaluate, are these practices and policies working? But regardless, these should be clear practices that remove the possibility for doubt or gray areas where some people may benefit and others may not. So make your policies super clear. And this leads me to the most important issue around benefits and is to talk about the physical space. So right now, Silicon Valley has often been, called out on our open floor plan and, this very egalitarian space, but it promotes collaboration perhaps, Anne, but it may not promote focused work, and there's a lot of distractions and noise. So there's been that question, and now with people coming back or coming back only some days, maybe there's a need for fewer offices and more conference space, more collective meeting or innovation spaces, right? But less of the individual offices. So that's going to be an interesting development. But the most important physical space that I think needs to be addressed is childcare. So in the United States, we do not provide childcare as a practice, and this has become a major differentiator. And I think it's kind of a funny story to share that Apple spared no expense in creating its new headquarters, 250 architects, $5 billion to build, and they even have as many trees as a national park, custom designed door handles, but they don't have a childcare center. And one of the most important benefits that workers cite is not trees. They actually are citing how important it is to have this on-site childcare. So if we want people to come back to a physical workplace, we need to consider those things. So those would be my 3 tips, and I hope people consider those as they look at the policies going forward.
Thank you, Anne. So we understand that your point of view is very employee-driven, men and women-driven, human-driven, and we love it because, of course, every single company is made and is operating because people are there and they make it efficient, they develop it, and so on. So the perspective you present is very interesting. Maybe we can switch to another perspective, which is the innovation perspective. So I will leave it to my colleague Anne Bertinier from CNAM in Paris.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Michel. It's true, I might have a more meso level or firms level here because, as I was saying in my research studies, I've been always focusing on the impact of proximity. So mainly first geographical proximity, but also other types of proximity. And I've been looking at this impact of proximity on the performance of innovation for companies. And of course, it started with a lot of literature. It already started at the end of at the beginning of the 19th century with the what we call the industrial clusters. And what is interesting here is that at that time, there were, like in England, for example, in Birmingham, we saw what we call a factory without walls. So in certain districts where because all the small companies were very close to each other, were seeing each other all the time. They had been exchanging a lot of knowledge. They were able to, we had all the value chain that was done without being a single factory. And this is where it started to talk about the importance of being close to each other, to be geographically close. And later on, it was the same concept was taken for describing what you well know in the Silicon Valley, which is more what we call now an innovation cluster and not an industrial district. But what is interesting in this innovation cluster, we talk always about the importance of being located close to each other. And we first talk about the importance of this geographical proximity because it enabled interactions, it enabled exchanges of tacit information, which are very important for innovation. And it enabled also all these interactions are very important to develop trust trust, and trust we know is a major determinant of innovation. And to build this trust, we need people to interact and meet. Of course, you'll tell me, well, we don't need to meet all the time physically. And it is true that this is why we now talk about other types of proximity, because it's not enough, it's not sufficient to be close together, to be close geographically one to each other. What is important also is to develop other types of proximity, such as social proximity, which can be done, of course, when you meet and when you see each other. But it can be developed through other means and maybe more virtual means. But it's fundamental to develop innovation. And after that, you have other types of proximity, such as cognitive proximity, which is linked to the knowledge we share together and to all the knowledge experience we can have. And what I see is that today, what was interesting to see is that we need to find a kind of balance. And this is exactly what you finished, Jill, with the importance of maybe we don't need to see each other. We don't need to be close together all the time and to interact all the time, but we need some moments to enable these social proximity to develop. We need also, we see that in sometimes we talk about communities of practice, and the most important example is the one of Xerox, a company you well know in the States, where they saw that people that were repairing the photocopy machines, because when they were meeting at the coffee machine, they were exchanging information that were not in the code books, in all the books they were using to repair the machines. And all this information, tacit information, was even more important to unblock situation. And if they hadn't been in contact, discussing, chatting, in front of each other, they wouldn't have been able to develop this new knowledge, the new body of knowledge that is very important to innovation too. However, what was interesting, because now I've been looking also at other collaborative space, and I'm very interested in Fab Labs, in maker spaces, in co-working spaces where we also have the essence of collaborative innovation. And I was really interested by how the Fab Labs, for example, have been able to react to the COVID crisis, and especially, I should say, a year ago, when there were a shortage of masks, a shortage of what do you call that, breathing machines, or all this. And I don't know if you followed, but Fab Labs have been able to react. And what is interesting is that a Fab Lab is a place where normally people meet to build things together, to use the machines. And here we had all these people. Well, they couldn't meet as many as they were doing before, because the space was more limited. But there have been a very interesting movement of exchanges of information on platforms. So it's a mix here, and I think this is where we're going, because now we're more used to use learning platforms. They have shared platforms where they were sharing information about all these technologies, all this innovation, and using it at the worldwide level in order to build in every Fab Labs, to build all these different masks and respirators. So it's interesting here to see that maybe now we might be able to have this what we call the temporary proximity. So to get to share some moment where you will be interacting in front of each other, when you will have all this test information and all this social proximity developing, and the use of online through the platforms after that to continue this sharing of information. I think I'm enough here.
It's the beginning of a new era where we have many opportunities to redesign, to to operate and to interact differently. John, what's your perspective on this topic? How do you use technology, relation, and so on?
Yeah, I have thoughts. I'd start off by, yes, it's technology, but really any organization is just a collection of humans working on a problem. Right? Your company might have a building with a logo on the door or on the top of the wall, but it's actually the humans who actually get the work done, who solve the problem, who make the product that you sell, that makes the money, that makes you pay the humans to make more products. Like it's the humans who do it. Buildings come and go. And just because I've been doing this for a long time, I'd remind people the technology is working. Like I've been doing this with technology that's been pretty rudimentary by comparison to what's available today. And the technology has been working just fine. We've seen that over the last year. The thing that is worth keeping in mind that this is a change in how you lead and how you organize companies. This is a leadership challenge, not a technology problem. And so like the stuff that Patrick was doing before COVID hit is exactly the right kind of innovation. It's this kind of how do you focus on the humans and how the humans work. And so there's many examples. Patrick, I'm sure, will talk about what he's been doing, but it's a leadership thing. It's not a technology thing. Existing consumer grade technology works just fine. So that's, I think, number one. The other one is, and it's kind of a bit of what Jill was saying here, humans are a social species. We like talking to other humans. We like meeting other humans. We do not handle isolation well, right? And we've had a long, rough year and a bit. Like the last year, if that's your first exposure to working from home, I tell people working from home during a global pandemic, an economic crisis, political turmoil, and other social unrest is stressful for everybody. This is not normal working from home. And so what a lot of people want to do is they actually want to go back to the office because they want to go back to life before COVID. They want to go back where they can meet a friend for lunch, have a glass of wine after dinner or whatever. We don't have a time machine. If you go back to an office now, it's not going to have, what are you going to do with centralized air conditioning? What are you going to do with trying to get through the subway, the Paris metro, whatever? Like these are all the transportation problems that are now organizational leader problems. If you say you must come back to the office, what happens to the people who have to commute? How do you deal with vaccines, vaccine certificates, proof of vaccination? Are you allowed to do this? You know, there's a whole bunch of legal policy questions that open up right away. And people want to go back to the office because they want human contact. And the human contact, or at least for me, I used to spend more time working with my coworkers awake in the day than I do with my family. Well, normally I'm not having breakfast or having dinner or asleep when I'm at home. But during the day, most of my waking days with my coworkers, and I miss the contact with those humans. And so this is what people want. They want to go back to that home human contact. And I think you can do that with we have evidence of companies who've been doing it for decades. If you plan it, if you lead carefully, and this opens up, we've talked about in leadership for years about management by objective and results-oriented work and all of these other delegating of authority and responsibility. These are all terms we've talked about for years, but this is forcing the issue. And I think it's really important. And I will say just before I stop my rant, there are three things I think that we have hard society and business problems that we have the technology and with the right leadership, we can actually solve. So before COVID, getting workforce diversity, like Jill mentioned, getting to an office if you're blind or if you're in a wheelchair, to get from your house to the front door of the office is not easy. And I keep picking on the Paris metro, but I tell you, the San Francisco subway system is just the same problems as well. So it's not just you, it's here. So the physical commute from the house to the office is a barrier. And that causes people to not even apply for a job. And so the single mother or even the single father who cannot leave the child 2 hours away and travel to an office because they need to be within 10 minutes of the child. Like, these are all things that are real and that are consequences of a leadership decision that says, come back to the office. So the workforce diversity gets easier if you can say you can hire people who can live anywhere and do not have to commute. There's also an interesting project I'm working on with California, where as an agency, we track the commute patterns of all the employees. It's all existing systems we know, we already have. We didn't have to build anything new. We built a new public-facing website just to show it. And you can see the amount of carbon reduction and climate change reduction just by having people work from home. In California, there's a government agency called the Air Resource Board, and they measure what are the sources of all the carbon footprint air that goes in terms of climate change. Where are they coming from? Agriculture, electricity network, building construction, all of these things. Everything in that list, like aviation is 1%, agriculture 8%, the biggest factor in that list. The only thing that's over 10%, the only thing that's over 20%, at 28%, is people driving their cars to and from the office. And that 28% we can make smaller just by having people not drive to the office. And why are they driving to an office? Because they don't have a job for life. And every time they have a job, they have it for a year or two, then they change to a new job for a year or two, and then a new job, which means they change their commute patterns faster than the municipality can change public transit. So they have to drive. That's why it's so big. So we can tackle this hard problem if we default work from home. And then you arrange and you intentionally schedule times for people to meet so you remember how much you like each other and work together. And in terms of economic development, this helps you then live in places that have no jobs, and you can provide economy for the local businesses. And this has been very successful in several jurisdictions. I've been involved with some, and I know friends of mine who are now doing some others. And so we can talk about that too.
Many perspectives in our discussion from, let's say, management standpoint, employee standpoint, community organization, city, urbanization, evolution, and so on. So, Patrick, you are part of the top management of this great company called Française des Jeux, the French lottery. So how do you make the links between all those, let's say, constraints, but also all those opportunities, I would say?
Yes. I will try to highlight first what are the positive outcomes we've seen during this crisis about the extensive use of remote work, and also the less positive ones, and how do we want to adapt the working environment to this new situation. So among the positive outcomes, I would say that first, for us, what seemed impossible became possible in a few days. Even if we had signed that agreement with the unions on the remote work, we still had, before the crisis, some of our employees and some of our managers, we were quite reluctant to, of course, accept remote work, or even accept that their teams would practice remote work. And in fact, again, last year in 15 days, everyone switched to remote work. So everyone experienced it extensively. It has become the rule now. So I think this is a major change that happened very, very rapidly. And I think it has proved to be very efficient. We have been able to manage our business from the homes of our employees with no real loss of productivity. It has helped our employees to save time. As was mentioned, our employees do not waste time in transport. And of course, you know that in Paris or in Marseille, where we have other facilities, commuting is quite difficult because there is high traffic with the car, and if you're using public transport, you're facing overcrowded transport. So I think it has brought some benefits to our employees. It helped to save time for themselves, for the company. It is more environmental friendly. So a lot of benefits. And on the other side, we also experienced that remote work sometimes proved to be less efficient, especially when we needed to work collectively, when we wanted to engage in a creative process, when we were trying to solve problems. At our company, we have a dedicated creative room and a creative team to help our employees to develop new concepts, new solutions to solve problems. So, of course, this is a physical place with physical teams gathering. And with the pandemic and the lockdown, we have tried to adapt this space to a virtual space. So it worked, but our conclusions is it's probably less effective. At least we haven't found the proper way to do it. I think through a screen, we don't see so easily the emotions of all the people, body language, nonverbal reactions. And this is key information. When you're in a creative process, you would need to get all the information, not only what is verbalized, what your speech. You need to get all the information. And I think this is, for us, one of the conclusions is for the future of our environment, work space, of our working space. Probably when our employees are doing individual tasks, they will favor remote work. If you're in individual work, you can work remotely very easily. When you try to be in a more creative, of course, process, then gathering people is probably a good solution. And this, for example, this is a big challenge for the way we have organized our working space. We were in an open space environment with the individual desk, but everyone could move from one desk to the other. And we had some meeting rooms and some creative rooms. I think what we will do is increase the number of meeting rooms, the number of creating rooms, and we will reduce drastically individual desks, because I don't think the future is really going to the office just to do an individual task. This you can do at home and quite easily. And it's really trying to make the office get the better of interactive work, interactions. And that's what we want to try to, of course, to achieve. And just to summarize, I think before the crisis and this pandemic, people were going to the office because, of course, they were required to. They were obliged to go to the office. And I think tomorrow, the big change is they are going to the office. They can work remotely. And when they will go to the office, it's because they wish to go to the office. It's because they consider that it is useful for them at some point on that occasion. So I think it will change the way people are using the office. And for us managers, the big challenge is how do we organize this situation? Because, of course, you want to facilitate interactions. And so what is the role of the manager? To facilitate these interactions and make the best of the remote work on one side and the collaborative work at the office on the other side.
Patrick, who's in charge in your organization of this, let's say, new setup, new organization? The executive committee is managing this topic. Who's leading the vision or defining the vision? And maybe another question, how do you support? You say it's very wonderful to work from home, but if you don't have an okay Wi-Fi, if your laptop is not there, so how did you support or maybe invest in working from home remotely?
Okay, I think for this big change and the big challenge we face, it's really an executive committee topic. So we are all working and thinking about what should be the future. The people in charge, or really the director in charge, is the HR director, but it's human resource. But it's not his name is our HR director is in charge of transformation and quality of the working place. It's the name now of. So we are not talking when we talk about him. We are not saying is the HR guy. No, he's the quality of working space and transformation guy.
It was already part of his, let's say,
it was already part of
the organization and to push further. So it's kind of a booster. And how did you support the home working? How did you support?
Yes. So for this, I think what we've done is we have equipped all of our employees. Of course, they had PCs, they could computers they could bring home, but we have supplied big screens because one of the key, of course, problem our employees would face is it's not the same qualitative environment that they have at the office. So for those who had problem with their backs, we provide specific chair. And for, of course, most employees, we provide big screens so that you can, of course, type and have a big screen in front of you and not just bent over your computer. So I think adapting also the home environments and providing some equipment is very important. If you consider that your employees are going to spend half or even 3/4 of their time at home working remotely, you have to take care of their environments. You cannot just say, it's not my problem.
That's actually very interesting. And it alludes also to some of the questions that have started to come in the Q&A and directed at John and you, Patrick, notably about adapting and the adaptability, let's say, of humans. And it's kind of there's one question taking this perspective of the worker and humans, the people, the employees have to adapt and from the manager perspective, basically giving directives, and that's just it. You have to live with it as an employee. And it's interesting because some of the discussion that you had here already, or the topics that were addressed, is that while as managers, there's many companies bound to, well, we have physical space, we have offices, we need to do something with them. And there's like ideas of how do we make them work, which leads to this perception of, well, the employees have to adapt. There is actually the opportunity, if you push it further, if I understand you correctly, to use the technology, to use the opportunity of considering remote work, to do the opposite. Is that actually, whereas humans had to adapt by going to the office before, now you can actually be more adapting to the human employee and their particular needs through technology, and maybe not even like redefining what the office is. Is the office a building in Paris, or is the office a meeting space wherever the people are? So maybe John, Patrick, those were questions kind of addressed to you. Maybe we can start with you both to react.
Keep going, Patrick. You had the mic. So.
No, you can start.
Okay. Right. Yes, this is a change, and it's big and dramatic in the sense of mainstream business. But two things. One, it's not new. A lot of companies have been doing this for a while. It's now being talked about a lot. I do note that humans have changed how we work several times over the last 150 years, significantly. And just to give you some ideas here, we invented factories 150 years ago. That was a radical new thing. And the whole idea of, in the 1920s, car manufacturers, one particular car manufacturer here in the US made 3 cars off the assembly line, did a racetrack to prove that they worked, stopped, took the cars apart, mixed the parts, built 3 new cars, raced the cars around to prove that they would work. And that was revolutionary, made the newspapers. And that was 100 years ago. So this is, change. And we have plenty of cities, to come back to something that Anne said earlier, these cultures of centers of, I'm sorry, I've lost the term, center of excellence or center of skills that Anne was talking about. We had places that were the best place to get swords made in Spain, in Toledo. Like, that was a center. Now, that technology of swords for war is not necessarily cutting edge, no joke intended, but now other technologies have taken over. And so things change. Shipyards are changing as well. And so society changes. And this is just, it can be scary, it can be disruptive, but humans are really, really flexible and adaptable as a species. We have reacted to everything from the invention of electricity to going to the moon, to the invention of underwater cables so you can send telegrams between the New World and Europe. Like, these are all things that we've managed to adapt and deal with. So I think it's something we can totally do. And companies have been doing it. So it's not like a theoretical. It's already in practice. It's just new for some companies. And I actually think we can do better than we were doing before. There's been a bunch of surveys going around, I'll find them and stick them in the chat, where people talk about not wanting to go back to life before. They want to deal with COVID going away, but they don't want 2 hours of commuting to go to an office because they can't afford to live near the office. And by the way, they keep changing jobs every 2 years, so they keep not being able to live near the office. They don't want to be unemployed just because they can't see. Right? These are real factors that we can deal with here. And I think we're open to them. Sorry, Patrick.
Yes. I think for companies and managers, of course, the reinvention of the working space is going to be a big challenge.
Yes.
Because we have big facilities, as was mentioned, big headquarters, fully equipped. And probably in the future, we will need a lot of collaborative rooms, creative rooms, but less space probably. So really, there is a big change in the way we see the working space and how can we provide at home, of course, the best service to our employers. And I think it's very important because at the company, of course, you have a brand. This brand, you need to sell your products, but you need to sell your company to your future employees. When you want to recruit, you have, of course, to your brand and the way you behave with your employees is. Today, I was recruiting new people, so I see the importance of course, the way they see the company and the values of the company and the way the company behaves and the way the company is treating employees. So I think adapting to the requirements of this new environment and the way our people will adapt to this new world, of course, will be key for us to retain employees, to attract new employees in their diversity, as was mentioned in the beginning, because you don't want to have if you want to have talent, you need to have a diversity of talents. So I think it's important to really attract all profile and to have to do the big or to propose the good solutions to adapt to this new world.
So we are looking for a win-win approach, isn't it? Something that can be positive from the company point of view, something that can be a benefit from the employee point of view. So, Jill, you were focusing on, let's say, impact and let's say, I would say, equality topics and so on. What are your comments about this opportunity to rebalance? And maybe the perspective are not the same in the States and in Europe. The relationship with the employees is not exactly the same. So how do we rebalance, I would say? And what are the advice to the managers to avoid, let's say, the impact you were talking about at the beginning?
Yeah, I think there is a big change coming up. There was an article I was just looking at that was why millions of workers are planning to switch jobs after the pandemic, right? That people are reassessing what are they getting out of their workplace. In the United States, loyalty to an employer is very low. In Silicon Valley, as low as 2 years or less than 2 years, their people are changing over their jobs, which is a pretty dramatic impact on the bottom line if you think about turnovers. So when we think about putting new practices and policies in place, you want to think about what are those practices and policies that are going to retain employees? What are the ones that are going to make them more loyal to some extent, because they're going to have the benefits, the flexibility, and the support that they need. I think just to also echo what John's saying, this is also a leadership challenge. It's not about seat time. Like, seat time never really worked. It's about having clear performance indicators and outputs, right? Measuring on these things and having exceptional communication skills. This is where that leadership training really comes into play. If you're having a stand up with your boss, they know what you're doing, right? They have a sense of what you're working on, what your productivity is. If there's something blocking you, they can help unblock it. So I think that these type of things, having excellent leadership, having clear policies, having the structures in place that allow people to have the flexibility to do their best work, is going to be really key to kind of reducing that turnover and connecting people to the vision of the company. The other thing you'll see is broadly, people want to have purpose. They want to see that their work matters. And so having a good company vision and how they fit into that vision is also really important.
Actually very interesting. That touches or leads somewhat to some question we received about how can you still be innovative. You alluded to, both of you, somewhat, Jill and Anne, in your opening, in terms of the equitable perspective of the serendipitous meetings that you might have in the office. That's not necessarily a given, versus the like this long-standing idea that you need somewhat opportunities to meet, and they have been, or there is at least this idea from before COVID that the coffee break, the water cooler, the quote-unquote serendipitous encounters were very, very important. I actually very involved in entrepreneurship, and there's this whole thing about the elevator pitch. Right, the elevator pitch is a thing that quote unquote is serendipitous, and an opportunity for 30 seconds to meet somebody high up and pitch your idea. Well, nobody did an elevator pitch in the last year because there's nobody using elevators, and if you were using it, you had to use it alone. So it's really an interesting perspective. I don't know if you both, Anne and Jill, could maybe dig just a little bit deeper on this perspective of leadership needs to reimagine work with the employees to satisfy the need of the company to innovate and the need of the employees to be able
to innovate with new organization. So how do we innovate? This is your line. How do we find the new ways, I would say?
Yeah, well, let me point out a couple of things, and then I'd love for Anne to kind of answer some of these questions as well. But the serendipity wasn't working equally well for everybody in the office. It worked well for outgoing extroverts, right? It worked well for people who had an old boys network. It worked well for people who had people to hang out with. It did not work as well for people who are more introspective. They want to take time to think about things. So one of the benefits of the remote workplace is it took a lot of things asynchronous, right? It gave people the opportunity to comment on things and take their time and think about it. It allows people to use online tools to foster collaboration. Like in a meeting, you can actually poll people and you'll hear from everyone. As you see right now in this conference that we're doing, everybody's head is the same size. So nobody has priority. Nobody's sitting next to the boss. It's a very egalitarian, democratized process of holding a meeting. And the data shows that people feel like their voice is heard more in this type of environment than in the traditional meeting space. So I think if we think about, how can we utilize tools to do things like polling, asking questions, gauging the temperature, making sure we're getting everybody's input, using asynchronous tools in some of the ones that have been talked about are Mural or Miro, which allow for people to kind of do that whiteboarding and post-it note exercises, but in a virtual environment. So I think this is going to take intentionality. It's not going to, you have to sort of engineer serendipity. Some companies I know are actually having people meet up with somebody that they wouldn't normally encounter. So, kind of providing even better serendipity, because they're saying, let's have somebody from this department that doesn't work with this department talk and just update each other on what they're working on. So I think there's some exciting opportunities, but I do want to hand it back to Anne, because there's a lot of value to in-person experiences as well. And that's where we need those opportunities too.
No, but it's exactly that. What we see today, there is, because we are in the era of every company would like to make open innovation, collaborative innovation. And what is really interesting is that there have been an increasing development, and Patrick knows that well, of what we call, there are very different names, but corporate innovation labs. So in order to make like Fab Labs within the company. And these tools that will be more and more developing are there actually to do this job, to find new ways of developing collaboration and participation of all employees into innovation, to develop what you call this more maybe equal serendipity. Because normally in innovation labs, internal innovation labs, the methods that are more empathic methods like design thinking, but many others, they are here to try to erase any hierarchical positions. The idea is that everyone has a voice, and this is the same weight for this voice, and it's here to develop this collaboration. So I think we see this development. And the French lottery, and I would like to say, because someone was asking why during the pandemic R&D were cut sometimes, and it's really, I'm part of an observatory of innovation labs, and La Française des Jeux, or the French lottery, is within this observatory, and it's interesting to see how certain companies decided to keep this innovation lab, to use them in order to tackle the problem of this remote and non-remote work during the pandemic, whereas other companies, more industrial one, completely stop the use of this innovation lab. And I think there are different levels, because La Française des Jeux, or the French lottery, they've been using that also to implement what we call managerial innovation, to implement new methods of thinking, new methods of developing these collaborative skills for all employees. Whereas in other companies, that was more used for disruptive innovation. But and it's sad to see that this has been cut in certain companies, when I think that this is the model maybe to be developed for the future, to enable this balance between not having only the coffee machine, but when people meet, they meet in a specific environment that enable this collaborative innovation.
So, Anne, out of the benchmark you make, do you think it's reflecting, let's say, the top management attitude versus innovation, vision, and so on? So, Patrick, you get a positive vibration from Anne on this topic.
Yes.
Because it's reflecting your management style and the wish of your top management team, correct?
Yes. I think also because we are quite an innovative company with a strong innovative culture. So for us, collaborative work, creative work was very important. So there was absolutely no chance that we would reduce or try to diminish our efforts in innovation or in collaborative work. So we tried extensively to adapt, of course, our collaborative methods to these new tools. As I mentioned, it was maybe not so effective at some time, but we tried. And what I think is what remote work and remote meetings need and require is much more process. As was mentioned previously, you have to give a voice to everyone. You have to respect that and check that everyone is sharing and has the same time to express their opinions. So I think probably one of the good things of this crisis and the extensive work of remote, we have learned to be working in a very process way. And in fact, when you want to do some creative work, you always need to have some frame, and you define your creativity versus a frame. So you need rules, and then you bring creativity. But if you have no rules and you don't respect rules, it's a chaos. So I think, and I strongly believe that to generate creativity, you need to have some rules and to have some process. And that's what we tried to do during this pandemic.
And maybe we need new words, isn't it? When we were preparing this session, we wrote down that we need to clarify distributed work, remote work, virtual work, telework, and so on, because we are talking about the same topic, but maybe with different perspective, depending on who's talking about the topic, isn't it? We've got also to have the vision, but also we've got to clarify how do we talk about this subject.
And I think John was like, I see you smiling at that. You probably have probably the most extensive experience with any of these versions of words and work.
Yeah.
Plus worked in actual effective situations where you were trying to maintain innovativeness in companies. What is your take on that?
Let me come back to the terminology piece. I want to make sure I first answer something that both Jill and Anne talked about that I thought was really important. And I didn't want to interrupt, but I want to say something there. There is this whole innovation thing. Is a real thing. Like for some, I mentioned the human contact about people wanting to actually remember that they like each other as humans, as coworkers, or at least respect each other. That's an important thing, right? So there is the need for people to come together, yes, and a space to do that intermittently, but it's not a daily commute. It's not even maybe a weekly commute. It might be once a month or once a quarter or whatever. But I caution that people can quickly forget and put rose-colored glasses on and look at history of life before COVID. Life before COVID involved also things like when you say, we're going to have an innovative brainstorming meeting about X, and we're going to not have it today. We're going to have it in 2 weeks' time because we have 5 people coming and they're all flying in from different cities. And it takes 2 weeks to organize all these people to come together. And when you add in all the transit time and logistics for the 2-hour meeting or a half-day meeting, and then all the travel time and logistics for everyone to go back to their various home cities, that's very, very inefficient. And then you add the sheer logistics time on that. Now it's into a couple of weeks' time. That actually slows down things. And I say this to say, that's an extreme example, but this is an example of how companies that are used to innovating while physically apart, because they trust each other, can out-innovate companies that are required to be physically beside each other. They're logically beside each other because they're able to connect with each other in seconds. But they're not physically beside each other. And I think that's an important thing that's a shift. And it can be unsettling for people who are used to, I have to go have this financial quarter meeting with Patrick. I must fly to Paris and then sit in a meeting room with Paris. It's like, well, maybe we do this this afternoon, not in 2 weeks' time. So I think that's one thing. And I think there's also a cultural thing I remember seeing in a few different company offices where people would want to be in the cube or the desk that was near the important person's office, near the VP office or near the CEO office, because then you got to be seen And then you got to be recognized. Then you might get a promotion more than the person who was on another floor. And I think this is one of the things we want to be careful about when we go to, do people go back to the office and only some people or not everybody? And how do you do this? This is an important thing. As for terminology, yeah, I think if you say telework, that's an original old term. And of course, these are all English words. So I'm sure there's multiple versions of this in French too. But if you say telework, meaning the work is done on the telephone, it can't be that complicated if it's only a telephone. What about all the other computers and engineering systems? And if you say virtual work, it means I'm real and you're second-class virtual. You're not real, right? Mm-hmm. This implies things like you only value the people who you think of as real, and this causes this mismatch. Whereas if you say distributed, we are all part of a distributed team. We are all responsible for communicating and organizing how we work. I think that's a hugely important mindset to use. Sorry for the speech.
Let's go for distributed work. I was listening to you, but if you are working for an airline company or managing a hotel chain company, you may sweat a bit when listening that you don't want to fly to Paris because it will be more efficient to do it remotely. And what we are talking about has a drastic or dramatic impact on what's happening on some industries.
Sure.
And it's very interesting to try to have visions about what will happen in the future when you are managing properties, hotels. Do you want to use those, let's say, facilities to become kind of a flex office platform?
It's already happening, yes.
We are talking about not only what's happening in the box, which is called the headquarters or the factory or the office. We can use the space around a bit differently and use different new location, maybe not to provide the screens for your home, but ask your employees to go to an office, a flex office near their place. And maybe we can solve some of the discrepancies we were talking about or the inequity we were talking about by saying, okay, you can use this space for co-working, or you can use this space to be alone and work quietly and not at home, I would say.
Yeah, if you have those kind of flex spaces, and I think there's a couple of things. Some people really, because of their home arrangement, what's going on in their human home life, they may not have room, or they may not even have good internet. I mean, it depends on your home and your life and your family and whatever's going on. But if you can go to a flex space that's somewhere in your neighborhood, you can walk there in 15 minutes. You know, there's this whole 15-minute Paris thing going on right now, right? What if there was a flex space within 15 minutes of your home and you could go there by foot or by bicycle? And that had a professional work setting, and that had a...
I'm quite sure there will be a big offer in the near future, because in all over Paris, you were seeing co-working spaces popping out.
Yeah.
And you could see that co-working was on the way. But I would say flex offices will appear in many locations to give the opportunity to commute less, but to have okay workspace.
Yes.
Why not? Let's do it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of these already popping up across the last few years. Yes.
It's actually very interesting, because one comment you made, John, was the rose glasses that people put on in just nostalgic remembrance of the time before. And it's very interesting because there is similar cases in history where there was the potential for change and people didn't take it. And it's oftentimes, if you look at it, a majority movement. And it's actually, here's a huge opportunity to be more equitable. And I think the fact that DEI happened now and this awareness came up now is not by chance. There are questions here from participants, like highlighting the fact that there's really an advantage in some cases for people that are more introvert, as was mentioned, like feel more healthy at home. They feel great. They are more productive. They are not having to put on a mask. Here in the US, there's a big thing called code switching, is that you cannot speak the same way at work that you speak at home, for example. And so it's like you're a different person when you're in the office constantly. You're constantly not yourself. in many cases, it brings out your authentic self to be in this remote environment. For other people that are really extrovert and thrive on contact, it is the extreme opposite reaction. It's really something that goes against their nature, and this is not productive for them. So it's really interesting to consider these cases. I get reminded of the case we have technology to do inner city farming, to have organic food created next door. And that was never adapted because people have the nostalgic image of farming, which is much more worse for nature, of course, because you have pesticides and everything, but they'd rather eat something from a farm that is much less eco-friendly than have it produced in a glass house in the city. This is a similar situation. So maybe to round up our discussion, I don't know if as a contribution to all the people that have been attending here, each one of you could give kind of their, maybe not solution, but kind of guidelines of where do you think, along which lines people should think and really put attention to now, as managers, as employees going forward for the next month, when it's about going back to work. What is the guidelines you would give them? I don't know who wants to start. Should we just pick up with you, John, again, and then go around? Okay,
I'll go first, then, and I'll pick somebody. How about Jill? Be warned. Okay. Thoughts. This is, to remind people, this is not a technical problem. This is a human leadership problem, and people have been doing this for years, decades. So it's doable. And I say that as a way of encouragement. Yes, there are many scary, complicated things, like what do we do with all the office buildings downtown? But there are also good things, like, does this revive communities and neighborhoods that used to have people leave in the morning to go to work somewhere else, and the community was dead during the day? So there's good things. And does this help with a lot of the workforce diversity and inclusion? I think to Patrick's thing as well I liked what Patrick said earlier, and we skipped past it quickly, but you want to take care of the humans. So you want to make sure that people have the right equipment to be able to do their job. So you want the right monitors and computer, for knowledge worker type roles. But companies already did that in an office. So just, if you have an office full of now dusty computers, let people take them home so they could work. It's not like you're buying 2 sets of computers. You just take the computer you already bought for them and let them take it home. Just things like that where you can innovate and make a huge difference for the humans. And every company I've worked with, they out-hire, they out-retain, they out-innovate, and because they premeditate how humans work together. And that's all a company is, a collection of humans working on something. So this is doable. We've been through bigger things as a human species. We can do this. Jill.
What are your keywords?
I should say hybrid. I know we like that for our MBA, but I think this is the hybrid way. We need absolutely to we need those moments on site for all what we've been saying about interactions, collaborative work on that. And we also need to use, we know how to use platforms now, communication, and we need to use that to follow the work. So I think the hybrid might be my word here to keep.
And I would go with equity. I think that this is our opportunity to re-engineer for equity. This is, as John has said, this is an opportunity to access a much larger, more diverse talent pool. It's an opportunity to retain employees because they don't have to be in one place to grow and scale in their job. We think about at the University of California, we have 10 campuses. If somebody works for information technology at one of those campuses, could they be promoted in advance to other campuses throughout the system? It's a way to retain talent and to really grow talent and to access talent wherever it exists. So I say take this opportunity, but pay attention to the data. Make sure you're listening to the employees. Make sure you're making sure that the policies and practices are resulting in fair and equitable opportunities.
Thank you.
Okay, and for me, I think it will be a question of the adaptation of our management. And for this, I think the key point will be to listen to our employees. And one of the key, probably one of the next steps we will implement is really conduct a big research to get, of course, information about how do our employees do see the future. What are their expectations? And we'll try to work on this. But I think really listen to the employees and the way they see the future and try to adapt your management to this new reality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was a fascinating discussion. We've been working on it so much and talking about it so much with our peers in the preparation, and still I get something better and newer and a better understanding out of it every time. It's really good to be able to think through these things, and I hope this was an encouragement really for all of our participants to do the same thing and continue thinking and think deep about all the implications that going back to the office will have for you, for your organization, and for your employees. I will leave it to you, Jean-Michel, to close us out, if you want.
Yeah, the conclusion of this type of session is always slightly the same. It's very complex to be a manager, but it's fascinating to be a manager because you've got to find ways to please the different stakeholders. Today we talked a lot, and this is key, about human equality, fraternity, and maybe we can put at the front of most of the public office in France or the French Republic, hybrid. Now we need to be a hybrid too. So it was a wonderful panel, a wonderful session. I want to warmly thank you. Again, the audience is getting, let's say, ideas, thought, and so on. So once again, we are very proud of this partnership with our friends of Berkeley. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. The next session will be announced soon, and we hope that you will join us for another fascinating session with CNAM Berkeley Horizon. Nadej will ask you to fill up your surveys, and the videos will be available soon, and we will broadcast those videos. It was a wonderful and a great pleasure to prepare this session, and it was also a great pleasure to moderate this session. Thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to the audience. And keep in mind, the terrace will be open in Paris in 5 days, so you can visit our place, and we will be pleased to have drinks with you and to enjoy connecting with you guys in the near future. Okay. Thank you. Take good care. Take good care. Bye-bye. Thank you.